Everyone. It's my pleasure to be joined here with Sister Hannah, and she is a nun at the Community of St. Mary's, Southern Province, and I'm glad to have you here with us, Hannah. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hannah will be talking to us about her experiences of vocation and some of her vocational journey, and I'm glad to be having this discussion with her, especially in light of a season of vocational discernment for St. John's, calling our rector, John Leach, and the transition that happened with Robert retiring, and then also with me discerning a call to Air Force chaplaincy. It seems just an appropriate time to think about vocation and what we can all learn about seeking to fulfill our own. So Hannah, just kind of starting off a little bit, defining terms and what they mean to you. What comes to mind when you hear the word vocation, or how do you think about that word?
The first thing that comes to mind is a calling. So I think about like the Latin origin of the term, call, vocare. I think it also involves listening, because you can't hear a calling if you're not listening for it. So as a Benedictine sister, which we'll talk about later on, we base our lives on the rule of Saint Benedict. And so in the prologue, he writes, and this is from the 6th century, but it's still relevant to us today. He writes, "Listen with the ear of your heart." So I think first, to find a calling, a vocation, you have to be listening for it. But that is the main definition I think of.
Yeah, that's great. Calling and being in a position to listen to that. Okay, some folks, when they talk about vocation, they're talking about singular, and some people talk about multiplicity of callings. How do you think about that for a person?
I think it's easy in our society to think you have one calling and you're stuck for the entirety of your life. I think that's false. I think people can have many callings. If you think about like a standard family, you have a calling to be in a marriage relationship, you have a calling to be a parent, you have a calling to be a job, to have a certain job. So I think for sure people can have different callings. And I think callings can also change too. You talked about St. John's. You can probably list different friends in seminary that have had different ministries and different callings. So I don't know personally of anybody that has had one specific calling their whole life. It's definitely a varied kind of relationship with calling.
That's great. And so, Sister Hannah, could you tell us about how you identify yourself now in your calling? You mentioned a little bit about being a Benedictine sister, but can you just tell us what's your title, kind of what's your role right now in this vocation for you?
So I am Sister Hannah. I started my journey in the community back in 2015. So the first 6 months that you are part of the community, you're called a postulant. You stay in the community, you don't go home or travel, you are really seeping in the daily rhythm of the life. After 6 months, if you and the community both mutually decide to advance, you're called a novice and you get the title sister. So my legal name is Heather, but I wanted to choose a biblical name for my religious title. And I love the story of Hannah in the Bible, so I chose the name Hannah. And so the novitiate lasts for 1.5 years, and then you're up for first profession, also called temporary vows, which lasts for 3 years. And so I made my first profession in December of 2017. So I am eligible for life profession December and January, depending on if the community has a positive vote. Alongside of this, I have been in seminary, and that's where I first met Jamie. So I've been working on my Master of Arts in the School of Theology, so part of my vocation is to be a student. I did not grow up in the Episcopal Church, so this has helped me deepen my faith and learn more about the liturgy and beliefs and theology of the Episcopal Church. We also have interns, summer interns and long-term interns. These are college students and recent college graduates, so part of my vocation is being a teacher to them, teaching them in the chapel, helping them with the garden, and once a week we take turns leading Benedictine reflection classes with our interns. And I'm also a preacher, so I've gone out to different churches. I've gone to Boca Raton, Florida. I've gone to Asheville, North Carolina, So that's another vocation, is preaching, because that takes a lot of time and energy. So even though I am a sister, I'm also a teacher, a student, and a preacher. And I also lead group tours pre-pandemic. So that takes a lot of training to be a public speaker, to know the community's history, to answer questions, to be fully grounded in what you believe. So seminary helps with that too. So I'm living proof that you can have multiple vocations.
Wow, that's great. Um, so, and one thing I'm realizing too, maybe a large portion of Episcopalians don't realize we do have religious communities. What are some misconceptions folks might have when they hear that we have Episcopal nuns or monastics?
They try to convince us that we don't exist. So I try to like pinch myself or have them pinch me. Or normally I don't let them touch me, but I try to just let people know that we do exist. Jamie's completely right. A lot of people don't know that there are Episcopal nuns. They think we're just like crazy, or, you know, we're just lying. But no, the community of St. Mary is the oldest Episcopal monastic community in America. We were founded in 1865. So I'm really honored to be a part of this longstanding tradition. And a lot of people also think that we are like mean teachers. I've had multiple people ask me if I'm carrying a ruler or if I'm going to hit them with it, because of baggage from Catholic school. So there are Episcopal schools, but I don't know of any mean nuns or monks that teach at them. We are smaller in number than the Roman Catholic orders, but we're thriving, and we recently had a new member join us who's 10 years younger than I am. So we're still going strong. And as Jamie can and tell you, we have oblates and associates too. So even though our numbers of sisters is small, we have over 240 associates throughout the world, not limited to America. And we have oblates and, like I said, interns too. So even though the Episcopal religious life world is smaller, we still have more connections with other walks of life.
That's great. And yeah, it's been a big treasure for me to the life of the community of St. Mary's, and other Episcopal religious communities like the Society of St. John the Evangelist. I was kind of introduced to Episcopal monasticism through Mother Julia Gatto's class on Christian spirituality, and she was really influenced by Episcopal monasticism through SSJE and the community there in Sewanee. It's like Episcopal Disneyland. We've got the seminary, we've got the university, St. Andrew's Day School. We have a monastic community. So it's a really formative place. So this is something that's interesting with vocation too, because the way your vocation happened is within community. And so you said the community will decide for this next profession to go forward or not. How do you feel about that? That's because you're kind of putting yourself in a vulnerable place of being in that spot of discerning as a community. What's that like?
Well, it's kind of like with the journey to the priesthood. I know with priests, you have a commission on ministry, but with the religious life, after your 5 years of upper formation, it's not something that you decide on your own. The community has to agree with too. Some of the sisters use the example of, you won't go up to somebody and say, I've been called by God to marry you, if the other person's like, hey, I just met you, I did not receive that vision from God. So it has to be like a mutual discerning. And we pray every day at noon office for all the other Episcopal religious communities. We have a rota, so sometimes we pray for SSJE or other communities. And we also have different days where we pray for all aspirants to the religious life, postulants, novices. And the prayer is always that that person with their community will discern God's call. So I think that's true because it's just like fundamental to relationships, right? With marriage, with friendships, with careers. Religious life isn't something that's weird or limited to the sound of music or a sister act. Like, we're human beings like everybody else, and our relationship with each other and with God it's relational. So the more you seek after God or seek after a friend or seek after a spouse, it's that intimate knowing and mutual discerning together. So it's not just somebody saying, I'm going to join this community because I want to. That's kind of arrogant. You have to have the humility and the listening. It all comes back to listening.
That's great. And like you said, it just seems life inherently is relational. So it's not kind of a you're in or you're out type thing. It's something that a community is discerning through the relationship. I think
Yeah.
that's great. And can you just tell us a little bit about oblates and associates? And I knew there was a large number of associates. I just didn't realize the reach was that large. But that's awesome. So could you just tell us a little bit about what those are?
So associates work with Sister Elizabeth, who's in charge of the associates, to write their own rule of life. And it's based on caring for creation and your body and your spirit. So the Benedictine life is all about balance. Back in the 6th century, when Benedict wrote his rule, he was kind of a radical because he didn't want you to be up at 2 a.m. for prayer. He wanted people, his monks, to get a good night's sleep and to have a balance of study, of prayer, of work. The core of Benedictine spirituality is ora et labora, work and prayer. So when associates write their rule of life, they set aside certain times for prayer, set a time for work and for rest and for balance. Associates can be men and women, lay or ordained, married, single, from all walks of life. We have a branch house in the Philippines, so we have a large group of associates in the Philippines, as well as other countries, not as large as that group, but people move and travel. The oblates, there's a 2-year formation program, and the sister in charge of that is our prioress, Sister Madeline Mary. They commit to doing the daily offices every day. So the daily offices are morning prayer and evening prayer. And they have an intense formation because they represent the community out in the world. They also have a rule of life, but part of their rule of life is the daily office structure there. And oblates, again, can be men, women, lay ordained, married, single. And we've had different seminarians do the oblate formation program alongside of their seminary. And one of my favorite stories is an oblate years ago, married, 5 kids, really busy, but the oblate program made him a better dad. So it kind of seems countercultural that a married man with kids would be a better dad because they joined a convent as an oblate. But because of that Benedictine balance, he worked in Tuesday night as movie night with his kids. And without that structure, it was really hard for him to focus with everything going on. But because of becoming an oblate and having that balance, he was more present to his family. So that's why Episcopal monasticism is still relevant today, even if you're not a sister, because our society needs that balance desperately.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and it's an incredible gift and a grace that your communities offer. And it's funny, when I was at Swanee, I never went to the convent. We would have quiet days in the area for the retreat center. But then after I graduated, me and my peer group of friends, we meet weekly and just stay connected, Tom and Carrie, and we came and visited and stayed with you all because that's one of the graces and gifts you offer is hospitality, and we stayed there, and I just felt a deep sense of connection, and um, it was just really powerful of seeing your life as a community and that rhythm of just prayer and work and balance, and I just felt connected and drawn to it. So that's why I entered into the oblate program, to be in a relationship with you all and try to learn to live with the rule of Benedict in relationship with you all. So I'm currently in that formation program, and it's greatly impacted me in my work and just my life as a person. So people may not be aware of the community of St. Mary's influence, but it's greatly shaped me. So I'm in this program where I'm reflecting on the rule of Benedict daily and doing the offices. And so when I'm doing those or even leading them here for the parish, I'm thinking about you all, and I feel like I'm praying with you all. So it's been really, really a great thing. So, and like you said, male or female, lay or ordained, these are things people can explore for themselves. And they're really, those relationships have a history throughout the history of Christianity, and they really can strengthen an individual's walk in faith. So thanks for telling us a little bit about that. So it's great to have you on and be able to have you share some of your vocational journey in life. So how about you just tell us some of your life journey, like where it started and some of the arc of that, and how you've kind of along the way discerned different callings you might have had.
Sure. So I grew up going to a church that was a fire and brimstone church. So my earliest memories of God was like an angry dad out to get me and really judgmental. And so I really liked the music of the church and the hymns, but I found a personal connection to God when I was out alone in nature. And I, even though I enjoyed singing and people, I never joined that particular church. When I was in middle school, I was sent to a Roman Catholic school, Our Lady of Lourdes, and that was run by the Sisters of Notre Dame, and I was in their after school program. So it also involved weekly mass, and I'd never been to mass before. And the priest that ran the school was really reverent and really just passionate and gentle about his faith with God. So I found myself really drawn to that kind of spirituality. And as a 13 and 14-year-old, I was going to mass Wednesday before school, Friday with the school, Saturday evening mass, and then back to the church with my family on Sunday. So I don't think you meet most 13-year-olds that are going to church 4 times a week and loving it and not getting enough. So that was probably an inkling, even in middle school, that I had a vocation to the religious life. And I was really close to the sisters too, and would talk to them about their vocation and calling. I went back to public school, went to a public university, NC State, majored in nutrition, went straight to graduate school at UNC Greensboro back in North Carolina, and then practiced for 5 years as a clinical dietitian. I always knew that I wanted to help people, and I was really interested in faith, but it took me a long time to reconcile those things. I think it was my last year or so of working when I really felt drawn more to talk to the chaplains about patients than to the doctors or nurses. I found myself wanting to pray with patients more than tell them not to eat cookies because I love cookies. And I really wanted to connect with patients at a deeper level and not just ask them what they were eating, but how they were doing, how their soul was doing. It sounds kind of cliche, but I really did want to connect with people at more than just a food level. So I heard about the Episcopal Church from the hospital chaplain, and so I joined that church in the area. And it was a good combination of not fully Roman Catholic, but not really evangelical. It was right in the middle, and I kind of felt like I'd found my church home. And she went to a boarding school run by Episcopal nuns up in New Jersey. And when she told me there were Episcopal nuns, I was overjoyed. I thought, like, why has no one told me this before? Like, this is a huge secret. Because again, it was 12, 13, and then I entered the community in my late 20s. So there's a huge gap when I didn't even know that they existed. So I was really excited. The community of St. Mary is the only one I could drive to because I was on a low budget. There's no Episcopal convents in North Carolina. So I drove to Sewanee and really felt a connection to it. And my first visit, there was a group of university students called SWEEK, so Sewanee Women Empowering Women. And there's a C in there for something that I forget what it stands for. But there was a new freshman girl, and we were out weeding the lavender. We have over 100 lavender shrubs in our garden. And she was just opening up to me about things she was struggling with, really interpersonal things. And I was really honored that she trusted me, and I opened up some of my personal things too. So it really felt like it was sacred ground, and I was a safe, sacred space for her to open up. And I just felt like this is my vocation. This is my calling. Listening, being a safe presence, being a safe, like, big sister for these students. And I've continued to act that out with being a big sister to our interns and to our volunteers. And so I felt like that is how I wanted to connect with people more than just at the hospital clinical level. So I kept coming back, and this October will be 5 years. So here I am.
Wow. So what did that look like initially? Did you talk to one of the sisters or Sister Madeline Mary and say, "Hey, I think I might be discerning a vocation"? What did that look like?
I actually, the running joke that the sisters have is like, I found the comment through a Google search. I mean, I found it through God, but God works in mysterious ways, including a Google search. So I Googled Episcopal convents I could drive to, and this convent pulled up. So it's important for everybody to have a website, because if they didn't have a website, I would not have known about them. But I did email Sister Madeline Mary, who's our prioress, and was in conversation with her for a few months before I made my initial visit out here. So it starts with checking out the amazing website and emailing and inquiring. So, and those people are called aspirants. So before you're admitted as a postulant, you're an aspirant. So you're just kind of looking and seeing and exploring the community and just asking questions. Yeah.
That's awesome. There is that hospitality of a web presence, especially if it's a nice site and easy to navigate. And the site looks great. It looks really, really nice. So that's very in line with the Benedictine hospitality of welcoming and helping people feel like they have a place. So could you explain to us what pryorus is? It just hit me. Some folks might not be familiar with that term. What does that mean?
So pryorus means first among equals. So in the Roman Catholic orders, they normally have a Reverend Mother. And some Episcopal churches, Episcopal communities still use that term, Reverend Mother. We used to have our head sister called the Sister in Charge, but then over time, our head sister really didn't feel comfortable with Sister in Charge, but instead the title Prioress. So it doesn't mean you don't have to call her Reverend Mother or Sister in Charge, just Prioress, because it's that Benedictine value of first among equals. We're all equal, and she's just the leader among us. So that's just her title.
And I think it's important to make clear too that if you're a monastic, it doesn't mean you're ordained.
Right.
Are there any ordained sisters at the Community of St. Mary?
There are not, but there are other communities that do have ordained sisters. So that I'm glad that you brought that up, because sometimes people assume that if you're a sister, you're a priest, or I've had our friend Dean Jackson say, like, because she's a priest, they assume that she was a sister. So I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about that. We do have a seminary just 4 miles away, and I am completing my seminary degree, but I'm in the non-ordination track. So like I said, there are communities that have both, and you can be both, but currently we do not have a nun-priest combo.
And it's so interesting, at a young age, you love being around sisters, you love being in church, and now that's what you're living now in your current vocation. So what's your daily life like? What does it look like daily for you to live your vocation? And you spoke about kind of the rhythms of prayer and work. What does that look like for you? And you mentioned some of the different roles, but maybe a glimpse into your daily life as Sister Hannah.
So I'm up before 6. I know you're all jealous. And then we have an hour of quiet time in the chapel between 6 and 7. So that's normally when we practice Lectio Divina, which is sacred reading of a text of scripture or other sacred readings. And there's different stages in that, but that's for a whole nother interview and webinar, but you can ask Jamie about that. 7 a.m. is morning prayer. And then if it was pre-COVID, we'd have Eucharist right after, but we have no priest, so we do the form for spiritual communion. And then after morning prayer, we have breakfast, and then we clean up. And then depending on the day of week, I will go to seminary for outside, in-person, underneath of a tent class, because this is 2020. And so that takes up a few hours of the day. Days that I don't have class, I might be responding to guests, because we have a big guest ministry program. We have somebody that Jamie knows in our hermitage right now. And so different priests and people from all walks of life stay in our hermitage, which is a self-contained cottage beside our chapel, and our entire downstairs is all for guests. So I might be sending emails, coordinating guest arrangements. I also preach at different churches, so I might be working on a sermon or a Sunday here at the convent, or Zooming a sermon. In the middle of the day is the noon office, and that's at, you guessed it, 12 noon. And so as Benedictines, we always sing a portion of Psalm 119. It has 176 verses, so we do not do it all in one day. We take different parts. After that is lunch. And then normally after lunch, I take about a half an hour break just to kind of rest. And then I might have an afternoon class at the seminary, or we try to work in the garden for an hour and a half each day. As I mentioned before, we have an organic garden, we have lavender, we're growing blueberries, we have some wineberries coming in, some muscadine grapes, really tall zinnias, lots of different flowers, broccoli. So it takes a lot of people to make sure all the weeds don't overgrow. So that takes up a good portion of the time. We try to commit to an hour and a half every day outside. 5 o'clock is evening prayer. And then after that, it's dinner. Some nights we watch the news. Sunday night is movie night. And then Thursday night and Saturday night is recreation. One of our summer interns made us Nonopoly. And yes, it is just as amazing as it sounds. You go to jail if you miss a psalm tone chant. That's just what happens in Nonopoly. And it's an amazing game. And then we have Compline, which is our night prayer, and that begins at 7:30. We have 10 minutes of silence, and then we start the service. It's a beautiful sung service. And then after that, it's kind of like on your own and rest, and then up the next day. And on Saturday mornings, we go to the local farmers market. Sawani's good about the mask mandate, so we have that protection, and we sell our jams and jellies and our lavender there. And it's a great way to just see other people in the community from a safe distance and meet other farmer vendors and get out. So, yeah.
And, you know, Sister Hannah, too, I was thinking about the caretaking you did with Sister Mary Zita when I first encountered the community on that retreat. I remember seeing Sister Mary Zita. She was in a wheelchair, and she had been a sister for a long time, but her health had really declined. But it was this powerful picture of community and love and prayer that she would be brought to services and be there. And sometimes she'd drop her book or not be able to hold it, and one of the sisters would be holding it as they prayed. But then that was also a different part of your experience, also helping take care of and be a caretaker for. Tell us a little bit about that journey and kind of that vocation that arose for you sisters.
Yeah. So I tell people that are exploring religious life and think like, because we had somebody say like, oh, I can never be a caregiver. And I think like if you're in a relationship with somebody, like a marriage, for instance, like your spouse's parents' age. So there's caretaking involved in all walks of life, not just with being a sister. And I was telling this person that had that question, that pushback, you know, it's beneficial in some ways taking care of older people in the community as a community, because it's not just left on one person. Sometimes it's left on the wife to take care of the in-laws and the kids and the spouse and everything. But it was a blessing in many ways to have us take turns with our caregiving with Sister Mary Zita, so it doesn't fall on just one sister. So when I first arrived at the community 5 years ago, she was up and walking with a walker, and then because of strokes, she was confined to a wheelchair and she had dementia. So anybody that's done caregiving with dementia, it's a huge burden, but it can also be a huge blessing. Most days her only words were thank you. And so it still moves me to tears when I think about that, because sometimes those are the only two words you need to say, regardless if you have dementia or not. So she taught us how to be grateful, because that was her main way of participating in convent life. Was she couldn't fully be with us in all the services mentally. She couldn't really sing that well either, and she tried to follow along as best she could for as long as her mind and body would allow. But she would look up at you and genuinely say thank you, and that is a huge ministry. And it was a huge ministry also, and a gift to our interns, because a lot of our interns hadn't interacted with older people. So when they lived alongside us for the summer, for the year, they said, you know, my grandmother or my grandfather lives out of state. I never see them. So this is my first time interacting with an older person, or with spending a lot of time with them. We had one intern go from not really knowing his grandparents that well to, after the year-long internship, now he works at a nursing home back in North Carolina doing computer work, because a lot of the older population don't understand all the changing technology. I don't even understand all the changing technology. And so he's like, because of the internship, I realized I had a heart for the elderly congregation, and now I have 200 grandmas, and it's amazing. And so like, it's one of those like side effects of community life with older members, is you just go about your day caring for them, and other people that live alongside you see that, and it indirectly impacts them. And this changed this young guy's life. Like, he realized he had a vocation and a heart for older adults, and his path changed to using his computer skills to help that population of society, and he absolutely loves it. He wrote to me last year saying he's gaining so much weight because of all the treats 200 grandmas give him for like helping check their email. Like, and so I'm glad that you brought up Sister Mary Zita, because you don't think of people with dementia as having a ministry, or society doesn't think they have like anything to offer, or gifts, but they have a huge amount to offer. And that's something our community can showcase with having different generations and under one roof.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think when people think about Episcopal religious community, or just community, religious communities in general, it seems like otherworldly or something, but it's very, your Benedictine community is very human. You know what I mean? It's about community and taking care of creation and taking care of each other and being open to God's voice through all of that. So the graces and gifts of balance, of integrating our whole lives in the sight of God, is just incredible ministry you all have. There's been different periods in history where I think monastics have always had some curiosity about them, but maybe in different eras and times there's been more of a prestige, even for some people who choose that life or that. But it seems like now we're getting more non-religious as Americans. And as we talked about, there are many Episcopalians who may not even be aware we have Episcopal nuns and monks. So there's an amount of courage, or just going against expectations or doing something different when it comes to vocation, it sounds like. What was that like for you, kind of doing something that was not the norm and feeling like, well, this is what God is calling me to do? What was that like for you?
It was hard because some of my friends stopped calling. They were intimidated to like call a convent. Some of my friends and family members thought that I had just given up on life, and that I was a disappointment, and that I would join the convent because I hate men, which is not true. Otherwise, I would not have this conversation with you. So there, like you said, are a lot of misconceptions about what religious life is, and choosing this life as giving up on life, when actually it's all the stresses of life kind of magnified, because you don't join the convent to escape life. Life still finds you in sometimes bigger ways than everyday life, with full-time caregiving and having the doors open for groups that sometimes come unannounced, and teaching interns. So I think the hardest person you can be in life is yourself. And I think that's why it still goes back to listening, because it's really, really easy to just kind of go with the flow and go with what society says, or go with what even your family, well-intended family members want you to do. And so that's one of the things I enjoy about the long-term internship, is we have these young people who think they wanted to do something, and were told by their family members and society and friends that they were going to have this vocation or this path for their life. And then having the summer or a year-long time alongside us, they have the time to discern and listen to what they really want to do. And most of them, their life changes as a result of it, not because anything we do, but because of the space we give them to listen and to discern. So I think it is hard to go against the grain and to figure out what you're really meant to do. And that can change. You know, we've had different people start out in different graduate school programs and then switch to something else. And there's different Episcopal communities started out as teaching orders, are now changed to retreat centers, or now for us, we've gone from, it used to be, this building used to be St. Mary's on the Mountain School for Girls. That was one of our ministries decades ago. And now we have the organic garden and it's caring for creation. So it is hard to be an Episcopal nun because there's not tons of us, but also I think it's more worthwhile too, because it's not something you can just do on a whim. You have to have 5 years of intense formation so you really know what you're committing to for life. So it is not easy by any means, but I think it's very much worth it. And one of the things they say in the Bible is, you know what you're called to by their fruits. You know, if somebody's a prophet is known by their fruits. And so I feel like our community and this way of life is known by the fruits when we see the impact we have on oblates, associates, interns, volunteers. And so, yes, we're in the minority of vocations, but the fruits make it all worthwhile.
That's awesome. I like that. I think it's very true. The hardest person you can be is yourself. And I think just trying to learn and live in Benedictine spirituality, the emphasis on listening and having that space, because I think many times it's the case where we feel pressured, even unspoken pressure by families, or this is what the people in my circle do, and so I have to do this. And then there's often times after years of just doing and going against with the flow, you realize I never really wanted to do this, or I never thought about it. It was just the next thing I was supposed to do. And that's part of the impact of what you all do and give to people, is creating spaces where people can listen and think about their life. And again, it's very human. It's not how to escape this life, but you have this one life to live, and how do you want to live it, and think about it and be intentional about what that means. Okay, so maybe some more rapid fire questions. We don't have to just spend 10 seconds on each of these, but maybe what are some common misconceptions people might have about vocation? We talked about a little bit that there are multiple vocations or different parts of a vocation as it evolves, or multiple aspects of a vocation, but are there any other common misconceptions about vocation, or yours in general, that you'd want to share about?
I think a lot of people, when they hear vocation, they think it has to do with religion and religion only. They think about religious vocation. I think, especially in the Episcopal Church, I've heard a lot of people think about that. But I've known nurses that really felt like being a nurse was their vocation. So I don't think when we hear vocation, we automatically have to assume it's some kind of ministry within the church. Vocations can be outside of the church, and they are just as valid and just as full of meaning. Another myth about vocation is that you shouldn't question it, because I believe you should. Even if you really love what you do, sometimes you get burnout. And one of my favorite quotes that was hanging up in one of the rooms at the seminary was, when you're ready to give up, remember why you started. And that has really, really helped me, because even if you love your job after a few years, or going through a rough time with parenting or spouse, remember what drew you to them in the first place, and that deepens that vocation and the meaning. So I think it's very healthy to question vocation. Different, as as being a priest, you're called to different churches and different ministries. And maybe every once in a while you need to question, why am I here? What am I doing? Is this really what God is calling me to do? Or as a nurse, I've known different nurses who started with pediatrics and then switched to outpatient nursing, or switched to other units. So I think we need to break the myth that you can't question vocation. I think the 3 myths about vocation is that vocation is something that's one thing that you have forever. There's lots of different vocations and it can change. Vocation is just about religion and serving the church, which isn't true. You can have other out of the church ministries that are great, and that you should never question vocation. And I think you should. And questioning doesn't mean abandoning it or leaving it. It means really knowing why you're here. What are you in for? One of the seminarians is from Jamaica, And she said her first year of seminary there, they had kind of a unofficial hazing where the upperclassmen would come up to her every day. I don't know if it was for a week or 2 weeks, and say, "Why are you here? Why are you here?" And they said it more aggressively than that. But the seminary culture was, are you here because somebody told you to? Are you here because somebody made you to? But why are you here? Like, really, why are you here? And that really impacted her in a positive way, because when you hear that every day for maybe just 2 days, but for at least a week or two, you really start to answer for yourself, not even just to get them off your back. Like, why am I here? And that's good to question.
Yeah, that's great. Hannah, kind of along with those misconceptions is kind of a related question of what would you tell someone, or maybe some helpful things you'd want someone to remember or know if they feel like they've missed out on a vocation, or they don't know what theirs is, or they feel like they couldn't have one? I mean, what are some helpful things you might say to a person who's just kind of struggling with the idea of vocation in different ways?
I would say first and foremost, with God, everything is redeemable. So if you think something is lost, or time is lost, or a skill or interest is lost, it's really not in God's time. And if you are interested in the religious life and you are older, a lot of communities don't accept older people because of health problems, but there's still ways to live out a religious interest through becoming an oblate or becoming an associate. I think the important thing, not only with listening, is maybe to find a spiritual guide or mentor, somebody you look up to, somebody that's known you for a while that can help you see the strengths that you can't see at that moment. So I think we also shouldn't put a lot of pressure on ourselves where we have to decide before the pandemic's over our vocation for the next 5 years and have it all planned out, because that's what I feel like a lot of society's pressure is, because one of the interview questions you hear is like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you're like, I don't even know where I'm seeing myself next week. So I think when you start asking yourself, what am I called to do? Don't put the pressure that you have to know by a certain time, because nobody needs that unnecessary stress in the middle of a global pandemic. So I think just having trusted people that know you well to talk to, and not beating yourself up on you had a dream when you were younger and you didn't do it then, because God uses different things at different times. One of my mentors started out in acting and then became a priest, and never thought that he would use his acting skills again. But then later on, he taught how to read the Bible in a theatrical way. And so he really encouraged me that, God redeems and uses all of the gifts, maybe not in the ways or the timing we want, but Julia of Norwich is right. All shall be well. It might not be how we want it, but all shall be well.
That's great. Yeah, and just as you were speaking, I was thinking of it reminded me of that pressure you were talking about, the anxiety. You hear about the midlife crisis, where someone later on in years just has a kind of coming to terms with what do I want to be doing and what am I making of my life. But I've heard of the phenomenon of increasing quarter life crisis of people in their young adult years almost having a breakdown of what am I supposed to be doing? Am I doing the right thing? And I think the most helpful thing is just take a step back. You're being loved and carried. It'll work out, like you said. And taking some of that anxiety out can help us actually kind of find it more. When we're placed where we're really kind of drawn up and clenched and just holding on so tightly, it can be hard to discover that, I think. So yeah, I love the idea of everything's redeemable in God's time.
And just to interject that's one of the reasons why I figured out that I wanted to be a nun. Is it was a New Year's resolution list I made. I think I had 10 or 20 things I wanted to do for the year 2015. And so I was trying to think what used to give me joy when I was a kid? What have I because I was burnt out with my job. I liked it, but I knew that I didn't want to work in the hospital forever. And one of the things was just visit a convent, because I had this dream since I was in middle school. And it was really just a New Year's resolution checklist, just as simple as that. things that, sparked joy, kind of like the Marie Kondo. What sparks joy, Jamie? And so you make a list of things that spark joy when your life is really stressful and you think like, these might just be a place you go to and it doesn't mean anything, but that was one of the things I did. And some people could say it was a quarter life crisis because I was in my mid-20s, but it was really just, I've been in the workforce, I'd done all the school, I'd done everything society wanted me to do and my family wanted me to do. And it was really just, okay, how do I reconnect to myself because I don't feel connected? And it was just that simple checklist that I acted on. So that's also a good place to start. And I think just having retreats here, I say this because I'm at a retreat center, but going away, pre-COVID Airbnb or some kind of safely trying to get away or just go outside for 5 to 10 minutes a day. Retreats away also help you discern who you really are, because it's when you're in silence, you can kind of literally silence all those other voices around you. And so that's really hard in our society because we always have our phones with us, our iPad. I have my iPad with me everywhere too. This is not a judgment at all. But because our society has this mindset that other people's voices follow you everywhere, you do need time to physically unplug and get away. So those were also just 2 little things I just wanted to throw in about going on retreat, whether it's, putting down the iPad or social media for a weekend or physically going somewhere for retreat. That can help. And sometimes, going through a crisis or anxiety can kind of lead to a breakthrough instead of a breakdown can lead to a breakthrough sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else you want to say about Vocation?
We have an amazing Facebook site, and I'm not just saying that because I run it. And we also have an amazing Instagram site, which I also run. So Community of St. Mary Southern Province. I know it's really long, but that is our name. We also have a Western Province in Wisconsin and an Eastern Province in New York, and a branch house in Malawi and a branch house in the Philippines. So the Southern Province is connected to the Filipino group, and the Eastern Province is connected to the Sisters in Malawi. So that's why it's such a long name for Facebook. So we are pretty active on there. We have a MailChimp account, so you could just message us with your email address. Our Instagram is poppin', or as the young people say now, vibing. It's vibing, Jamie. And so St. Mary's Convent, all one word on Instagram. We got a new puppy, so That Convent Dog. And as always, Sophia, That Convent Cat. So we have 3 Instagram accounts. And so we try to stay pretty active on social media because a lot of people are going to that, especially more with the pandemic since they can't get out and travel. So, I wish I could have like a band when they travel all the places you've gone to, as like all the places I've gone to preach with like a list of locations and churches. But, we do preach and lead classes and do adult forums, and we can come to groups, and we're available by email too. So if you just want to talk or send more questions you have, there's no dumb questions, just email us. And we also take prayer requests too. So if you want to know that some nuns are praying for you, our ministry is like a lot of churches online and virtual now. So we try to take prayer requests online and do virtual retreats. We're doing one tomorrow, actually. Our very first intern, Eileen, is doing one on herbs, how to reduce stress through adaptogens. So that's one way we're continuing our ministry, but it'll also be on Zoom. So just reach out and tell people there's Episcopal nuns.
That's awesome. Great. Great Instagram account and social media. And I'm not just saying that because you're the one running it, but it's really, really good. And you're the only, Penny was the first praying dog I'd ever seen. And so the sisters, when me and my friends would stay, or when I've stayed over by myself to pray, the bell would ring and the sisters would come in, and there'd be some people setting up for the service. But Penny would walk in, and she had a little bed near the prioress' seat, and she would just sit there. And then after service, she would walk and leave with everyone. So 4 times a day she was going in there. It's just really amazing. And I hear the new dog is learning its way around the chapel too. So
I think Penny should be up for a canonization. That's one of my ministries too, is terrible puns. Our new pup, Ellie, she's not a nun yet. Penny was Sister Penny because she was a nun at heart, but Ellie is still an aspirant.
That's great. So, yes, we'll encourage people to look at the website, social media, and find ways to learn about your work and support the community. It's an important life and witness you are living and a gift you're giving to all of us. So I just really appreciate you joining us in these virtual times, and it's good to talk to you, Sister Hannah. I'll see you around.